Hello everyone, Cultured Khun here. So I'm going to speak briefly about creed consciousness. I don't have too much time, but this is following the president said so far. So I've mentioned class consciousness, we've spoken about color consciousness, and this leads me into creed consciousness. So before we get going with this, let me define what a creed is. So a creed, generally speaking, is a set of governing principles. If you're in the Catholic Church, you may have heard of the Nicene Creed, which was set by the Nicene Council, which was deciding what underlying principles underpinned the philosophy of Catholicism. I believe in the one God, Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, yada yada yada, or the Apostles' Creed. And generally speaking, when people talk about a creed, a personal or public creed, it has to do with a declaration of ideals above the individual. It speaks to ideals that align with the perfect orientation of an individual in a society, obviously relating to other people. And building on that, I want to talk about personal creeds. So we can only speak the truth from our experiences. And if we talk of tabula rasa, which is the idea of being a blank slate from John Locke, then we can talk about how moving through the world, we have blank slates who are written on by our experiences. Our experiences inscribe lessons, teachings, ideologies, and actions onto that. And our reactions to these experiences essentially is what makes for our worldviews. And with that being said, let's talk about mine. So, in the previous videos, I spoke about being black, being of high class, having been Christian, having been brought up a certain way. And I think this is to do with the creeds that were presented to me at an early age. So, being Christian, the Christian creed, meaning the governing principles of my life were of Christianity, the book of the Bible, and the story of Jesus. And Christ means anointed one. Jesus of Nazarene was a hero. He died at 33, challenged rabbis at age 11, performed miracles all across his life, and ultimately led a life based on peace, love, and harmony, and taught the greatest command to be to love your God, and more importantly, love your neighbor, because you cannot claim to love God and not love his creation, who is your neighbor. And so when you talk about some of those underlying principles, peace, love, harmony, and you look at the outlook of the world today, it's a stark contrast. And the reason why I say this is because it's blatantly obvious. Men of peace or men of proposed peace create weapons of war and make peace the only available option because they are so willing to go to war to destroy the planet. You look at the world powers today as presently constructed. Many of them claim peace, but that's only because they remain unchallenged by the nations whom they claim hegemony over, particularly African nations or developing nations in South America or Southeast Asia. And moving on from that, we have religious creed, you have personal creed, you have philosophical creed, you have historical creed. So I've mentioned how I was brought up a Christian, and that means my value systems in large part were based on the book, based on the writings of man, who are flawed, based, biased, inconsistent, and I'm well aware of that. Because all men suffer from the inconsistency of being human. All men have their own biases. All men have their own agendas. And the Bible, like any other book, has agendas within it because it has many various writers who address their writings to different people who were teaching with a different mind frame to those who were outside of their mind frame. They were trying to colonize the minds that existed outside of their language games. And in large part, they succeeded with that. Following from being Christian, I'm also black. So we have black consciousness, the idea that being black is more than skin color, pigmentation. And I mentioned this in the video prior. Being black comes with certain connotations which might not fit every black person, but we all have to subscribe to, whether we like to or not. Even if I have a white wife, even if I have majority white friends, even if I went to majority white school, even if my life resembles that of a white man, objectively, minus culture, I am black. And that imposes on itself a culture of subordination, a culture of insurrection, a culture of rebellion and challenge to authority, and having been conquered or colonized and having been dominated by people foreign to your own. Moving on, I'm African from the original continent of Akel Bulan. For those of you who watched my Afro-Saxon videos, I talk about the historicity of being African and even where the name African came from. And we talk about Africa, sunny. We talk about the land of sunny, the land without winter, the land without cold. And we talk about the kingdom of Kush, the great continent, the original continent where our original ancestors, the original Eve, who existed 300,000 years ago, who's 294,000 years older than the Eve of the Bible. That is the continent I come from. And the implications of being African, unfortunately, you inherit that history of colonialism, which is presently neocolonialism in the form of foreign direct investment. You see with multicultural loans being built on the backs and the blood and the bones of our ancestors, and we inherit a debt which we never incurred. And this is a debt to the world, a debt to free ourselves, a debt to liberate our minds, our bodies, and our spirits. You also have with that a loss of your spiritual systems, a loss of your original value systems, a loss of your philosophies, which were buried and bathed in the blood of many of our ancestors right here on the ground we live on. Aside from being black, aside from being African, aside from being a Christian, I'm also a young man. And no, do I wake up feeling like a man every day? No, what is a man? Who is a man? Why is a man? How is a man? How did you come to the conclusion that you are a man? So some people come and throw out definitions, protector, provider, this, that, and the third, and these are arbitrary things. The truth is, in base form, what is a man? An adult, male, human. So I am an adult, a young adult, male human, which means I am a full-grown adult who can produce children because my testes have semen. So I impregnate a girl who has been through her menses, or at least started her menses cycle. She can carry my child, and we can together be conduits of life and bring potential chaos into the world. That is what a man is scientifically. You can do XX, you can do XY analysis, but in base form, an adult, male, human. So I'm talking male, speaking sex. I haven't mentioned gender because that's a whole other ballpark, which we'll unpack another day. Now, what are some of the underlying principles of being a man? I mentioned before protection, provision, at least protection physically from the world of harm, and provision, at least in the current sense, monetarily. Before, it would have been hunting. So young males like me, typically in the range of 18 to 25, historically, have been expected to protect physically. And if you look at the ages of conscription, when people want to start a war, they look for people my age. They look for people, at least with my spec, 18 to 25, not too many allegiances having been pledged prior to that promise of sovereignty to protect one's nation or one's rights. And yeah, generally men 18 to 25, the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, and that will happen at 25, but unfortunately if you had fought in a war, you might not be able to live to that fruitful age of 25. And so being a young man, I think, is an interesting spec today, because there are many creeds being imposed on you. And right now, I think we live in a world which is tilted upside down. It's foreseen agendas. And I mentioned there is a gender, there's a whole pronoun push, and all kinds of strange things are going on right now. But I've noticed in the creeds I mentioned previously that there is a push away from them. There's people who are trying to, there's organizations called men going their own way. And whether it's an organization or a front or a push or a sect or a phase, whatever it is, there seems to be a discontent with the dispersion of doctrine, dogma, and ideology particularly amongst young men. Young men right now have the highest rates of suicide. Women have the highest rates of attempted, but men the highest rates of accomplished suicide. So you find for every woman that attempts suicide, 3 men accomplish suicide. So men are harming themselves successfully. Men are abusing themselves successfully. Men are more alcoholic. Men are more drug users. Men occupy the bottom half of society more so than women do. And, these are the conversations we need to have. Why is it that the supposed superior gender, sex, whatever you want to call it, is suffering the most at their own hands? Why is it men are more victim to violent crime? And the truth is there is no unifying creed amongst men. There is no honor amongst thieves. There is no patronage amongst the patriarchy. And you find that we inhabit a very toxic environment as men, as Black, African, Christian, particularly young men. There aren't a lot of ambassadors for our cries for help. There aren't a lot of places we can go to without feeling emasculated, despite being desperate for that aid and assistance in our lives. And part of the reason why I got into podcasting and the media sharing world was to share the narrative of the disaffected Black African Christian young men. And you don't have to be Black to relate to my story. You don't have to be Christian. You don't have to be African. You don't even have to be young. But it's a very serious problem because unfortunately, we have nowhere to go. And disaffected men cause havoc. They cause revolutions. They rebel. We are a very chaotic group to have against society, against the system. And I think with the way things are going, that's how men are right now. I think men want to push this idea of a free creed. I think men are living quiet lives of desperation. I think men secretly want to quit their job, run away from their families, hate their wives. I think that there are men who feel they have fulfilled their obligations, but haven't fulfilled the spirit inside. They haven't lived a life of self-fulfillment. Their prophecies have been falsified, and a lot of time have been sold fake dreams. Okay, you are a man if you have the white picket fence, you have the dog, you have the wife, you have the kids, you have the house, you have the cars, you have the money. But why do you still feel empty inside? It's because of a lack of a creed. It's because of a lack of a set of governing principles that pushes towards fulfillment and meaningfulness in your life. Now, I want us as gents, but also as people of the world, to be conscious of the creeds being pushed onto you, to be conscious of the words being written into your spirit, because these things start from home, okay? And the reason why it's important to have a creed is because idle mind is the devil's workshop. And that means dark things will start to happen the moment you don't have a plan, the moment you don't have a purpose, the moment you step out of line from living with your purpose, the moment you don't carry your load and you aren't responsible for carrying your cross. Other people will have to, and that increases the burden of responsibility on everyone else around you. I would like men to take up their rightful place in society. I would like men to take charge of who they are, to take charge in their families, to take charge in their environments, to be dominant in certain spaces. That doesn't mean to push women out. That doesn't mean to cloak the pathways. That doesn't mean women don't deserve everything they're worth and more. But what it does mean is men need to stop being cowards, because I think right now, my generation particularly, there's a bunch of sissies. I'll be quite frank. This lot of pussies, excuse my language, is quite frustrating to deal with, because we have men who don't know who they are. We have men who are so blasé and lazy-dazy about who they are. When we're at war, men at large are under siege or under attack from reformists who are radical in their revolution to destroy things as they were, the status quo. And now I'm all for revolution, I'm all for chaos, I'm all for anarchy. I think I'm an anarchist, at least politically speaking. But what I'm not for is having lost souls nomadically meandering the world and meaning and treading lines, not putting in effort. I think one of my creeds, which I was taught from school, is quand je puis. which means as much as I can in France. And I'd learned this at Stonehurst College in the UK, Lancashire. Shout out. And ultimately, as much as I can speaks to the output, not only of a man, but of a person in general. A good man, a virtuous man, a courageous man puts himself out, he maximizes his potential. And he does this by enhancing himself spiritually, spending time in prayer, meditation, discernment, physically, rigorous exercise, eating healthily, monitoring what goes into his body, and resting well. He also does it mentally, which means reading, edifying the mind, engaging in intelligent conversation, being cognizant of catalysts that could potentially corrode his core and the core values and principles he has. And what we were taught is to have a structure in your life, have a structure of thought, have a structure of doing things, because the world ultimately is governed by systems. And the most important system you ever have is your system of self, your system of relating to others, because we exist on a relational plane. So depending on the systems that govern your thought, the systems that govern your intellectualization of ideas, that govern your philosophizing of people, that govern how you move in the world, that will dictate the pace at which you either grow or shrink, you destroy or build the world around you. And before you build the world around you, you must build the world within you. You must build your heart, your mind, your soul, your body. You must build that body, that system, that school of cells, that community of DNA, mitochondria. You must build that to be the best it can be, so you can put out as much as you can. And I think as a man, it's probably no better time to hear this message than now. Now, for some of you, accomplished men, made men, so yada yada yada, you say, what can this young man tell me? Fair. What can I tell you? But I can speak from a point of the people who are having to carry your load. One, it's unfair. And two, you most definitely know you can do better. I also want to call to order these so-called made men, these elders, these higher order thinking individuals. Mentorship, servant leadership. I think the best thing a man can be is a leader, but more importantly, the best leadership style, at least the leadership style that resembles the one most ideal to me, is by example. So I think you older men need to lead the way. You older men need to take charge. You older men need to step into your place and fill up the minds, the hearts, and the souls of these young boys. I think, having been a young boy myself, I can speak to that wound of leadership, of mentorship, where I think my elders could have been better. I won't say they were, completely trash, because credit to them, I am who I am because of them. But I think my learning curve with a lot of lessons in life would have been a lot shorter had I had someone who'd been through that speaking to me directly in a manner which I would understand, because they have been at my stage in life, across all stages of my life, at some point in their life, So it would have been nice to have a helping hand. And I think you see the societies that are more functional. You see with the Afrikaners, you see with the Muslims, you see with the Indians, you see with the Chinese, you see with the Arabians, the Saudis, that when you have strong men in their place, mentoring their children, grooming them for leadership, grooming them to be strong, grooming them to be impactful, grooming them to be resourceful, that societies build on the backs of men. And unfortunately, I think we're burdening our women a lot more with our lack of leadership. And that's not to say they shouldn't lead and they can't lead and aren't capable leaders, but they shouldn't have to lead as much. They shouldn't have to carry as much, because we as men can do better. And even myself, I can call myself to order and say, I need to spend more time mentoring my younger brothers, whether it's my actual brothers or my brothers in spirit, my younger cousins, the family of my friends and the friends of my family, the younger ones. We can all spend more time in fellowship, whether it's in faith, whether it's in church, whether it's in sports, whether it's just giving your time in community work with younger boys. And I think that, as a man, should be an important and integral role of being diligent to your duty as a man. I think that should be installed as part of our creed as men, because I don't think we do have a particular creed. I think for a lot of men, it's just freestyle. You just do what you do and you live with the consequences of your actions. And unfortunately, we have a collective responsibility as well to live with the consequences of the actions of bad men, as we see. Because we have to call them to order. We have to make sure they don't exist. We have to make sure they don't have the misinformation to get to a point where they're misleading themselves and others. We have to make sure that when we teach peace, it's because there is no other option. It's because there is no prospect of war. It's because it's best for what society needs. We need to reach a point as men where we can have genuine, deep, meaningful conversations about the struggles, the challenges of being a man. We shouldn't have to have, and I'll emphasize this, we shouldn't have to have grown men suffering the pains of being a man, killing themselves because the pressure they were under was too much, because they felt they would be emasculated if they opened up, because they felt that they had no right to their resentment that they harbored deep in the recesses of their heart, because they felt that their inner child lacked love, because they felt that their inner teen wanted revenge, because they felt that the inner adult just wanted peace, and the only peace to their problems, the only peace that seemed plausible, the only peace that seemed infinite was death at their own hands. Okay? So this is something that is critical. This is something that is important to me because I have lost people to that same pain. So when I'm talking about being disaffected, when I'm talking about being disrespected, when I'm talking about feeling alone, when I'm talking about your coping mechanisms failing to help you cope, when I'm talking about living a life of pain, persevering through that pain, only not to be given thanks by the people you endured that pain for. I know exactly who I'm speaking to. And I know those of you on the receiving end of this video know too who I'm speaking to. It may be you. It may be someone in your life. And so send this if they need to say this. You don't need to die. You don't need to be missed to be remembered. You don't need to short end your placement in society. You are loved. You are needed. You are responsible for people in your life. And your story could catalyze change in other people's story. Your lessons, your teachings, simply because you don't have money, doesn't mean you're not allowed to put in effort, attention, and time into people. It does not mean you cannot trade other aspects and assets of your own to benefit society as a whole. And this is why, prior to this video, I spoke about needing alternative measures to value than money. Because a lot of men attach the idea of value to money and currency and the amount of capital they command, when in truth, the most historic men in history were not remembered for money. Jesus Christ wasn't a rich man. Blessed be Prophet Muhammad wasn't a rich man. David was a shepherd, a sheep herder, a farm boy. Many of the great teachers, Buddha, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, these weren't rich men. The founding fathers, the Nikola Teslas, these weren't rich men. So we need to, as men, call ourselves to order, monitor our thoughts, monitor our money, effort, attention, and time, but then also place value appropriately on on ideals that affect everyone. And I say ideals, not ideas, because ideal, striving for that higher strata of awareness, of consciousness. We need to become creed conscious. We need to become conscious of the governing set of principles that underpin our decision-making processes. Okay? So please, gentlemen, monitor your creed, monitor your money, monitor your mouth, monitor your effort, monitor your attention, monitor your time. Make sure that you are placing appropriate input into endeavors and ideas that will benefit on the other end of your output. Okay? And make sure that when you go to sleep tonight and you experience that existential crisis and you have that feeling of not being where you're supposed to, and you feel like you want to go to war with the world because the world is at war with you. The world is at war with everything that is a man, everything that's supposed to be a man, everything traditionally masculine, everything that fulfills the archetype of being a man. Remember that the right thing to do won't always be the most favorable thing to do. And being a man, unfortunately, for many of us, will be a thankless job. Young men, you ask your fathers, your grandfathers. You stepping into society, you fulfilling your rightful place, you taking up responsibility, won't get you the praise and cheers, the adulation that you want, that you crave. You need to seek that within yourself. You need to stop externally validating yourself with the houses, with the money, with the cars, with the women, with the clubbing, with the drinking, with the smoking, with the drugs. You need to connect with your higher self, gentlemen. We need to operate from a level of connectedness, collectively, to raise up the profile of what it means to be a man. And that, I think, ought to be our new creed. We ought to move different in a world which does not exist yet, but it does exist here. And if the mind can conceive it, the body will receive it. That being said, Kultured Khun out. Thank you.